I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Alphabet reports fourth quarter results exposing new pressure on margins and spending at the search giant. Highlights from my conversation with Alphabet CFO Ruth Porat ahead. Plus, Tech's going public pipeline is picking up. Messaging service Slack files paperwork for its direct listing. And the crackdown on China's Huawei continues. We will bring you the inside story of a Chicago startup that claims the company was trying to steal its technology. It starts with broken glass. But first, to our top story, shares of Alphabet falling in after-hours trading. In the fourth quarter, ad revenue for the search giant remained strong, with paid clicks climbing over 18% to $27 billion. However, operating margins fell below analyst expectations, and expenses rose. Meantime, the investor call is underway. CFO Ruth Porat addressed rising costs. Take a listen.
The key drivers were first, content acquisition costs, primarily for YouTube, mostly for our advertising-supported content in what is a seasonally strong quarter for YouTube, but also for our newer subscription businesses, YouTube Premium and YouTube TV, which have higher CAC as a percentage of revenues.
Joining us to discuss in Massachusetts, we've got IDC President Crawford Del Prete, and in New York, Paul Sweeney with Bloomberg News. So, Crawford, I'll start with you.
Sure.
What are the key highlights you'd pull out here? Investors seem to be focusing on margins and CapEx.
Yeah, this is, hey, Emily, this is not as you said, this is not a revenue problem, right? This is an operating margin problem. And, you know, we saw that even though revenue in the core advertising business was quite strong, and even though revenue in some of the other revenue, which would be things like Pixel and Google Home, actually beat expectations slightly, they just are having to pay more for some of the services that they want to create. I mean, if you believe in the long game here, if you believe that this company is really going to develop over-the-top services, they're going to have to pay more for them, and you have to adjust your model in terms of what they're going to pay for those services, particularly to their TAC distribution partners. And I think Google really is going to be trying to be the video disruptor here, and that's what you're seeing in the numbers, which is a cramping of the operating margins.
Now, I spoke to Porat just before she jumped on the earnings call and asked her specifically about CapEx, and she told me we remain very focused on investing for the long term. We take a disciplined approach to key areas. CapEx growing at a sizable clip. The primary driver continues to be investing in technical infrastructure to support growth, data centers, and machines. This reflects our outlook for global growth in ads, search, YouTube, and cloud. So sort of echoing, Crawford, what you suggested there. But Paul, investors are concerned about it.
Yeah, I think they are in the short term here, but I think the market has generally given Ruth Porat, very, very high grades for coming in and really instilling a sense of, I think, more certainty as it relates to both their operating expenses and their CapEx, so a certain level of discipline. But, the three areas where they are investing are very high growth areas, including YouTube. Internet ad spending on video is the fastest part of internet ad spending, and clearly Google's is a leader there with YouTube. So when you combine that with the cloud, another extremely fast-growing end user business, I think longer term, most Google investors feel very comfortable with Google's P&L and capital spending.
Now, there continues to be questions about how much Amazon is now taking a bite out of the digital ad pie. When Amazon reported its results, their other revenue category, which is mainly advertising, rocketed up to $10 billion. So we asked about Amazon and how serious a threat Amazon is in the conversation with Ruth Porat, and she said, whenever new inventory is created that attracts consumer interest, advertisers will be interested in advertising against that inventory. The market is continuing to grow, and there is still a tremendous amount that is offline. Crawford, would you say that the pie is growing, or is Amazon actually a threat to Alphabet?
Amazon is absolutely a threat. Amazon has got a lot of properties. They're going to be bringing on a tremendous amount of inventory going forward. And if nothing else, the classic law of economics, right? What does that mean? It means there's going to be more supply for, a finite amount of demand. So what Google is going to try to do is they're going to try to create more valuable services where they can potentially offset some of those trends. But, Amazon getting into this market, like Amazon getting into most people's market, is a threat to Google in this space.
Now, I got a question earlier. Why don't investors punish Amazon for the pressure on its margins, but punish Google in this way? And there's still a lot of data that Google doesn't give us about how fast YouTube is growing, how fast is the cloud growing, how fast is the company really diversifying beyond advertising. Paul, do we get any hints here about, how healthy is the cloud business? How healthy is YouTube, even though it has a lot of potential?
No, you're right. Google needs to do a better job with disclosure. We've been saying to them for some time, particularly about YouTube, because it's a business that's probably $8 or $9 billion of run rate revenue, relatively high margins, and we think it remains a long-term growth story for them. But I agree with Crawford that it's requiring a lot of investment, and that is pinching profitability in the near term. But I think this company, historically, Alphabet has gotten the benefit of the doubt from shareholders for making the long-term bets, not just the near-term operating expenses, but the long-term bets. Ruth has dialed back some of those crazier, more moonshot type things, and they've really focused on three key areas which they think can drive growth. And I think, again, most long-term investors will give them the benefit of the doubt.
They're also continuing their share buyback program. Take a listen to Porat on the call just moments ago.
Finally, on capital allocation, our primary use continues to be to support organic growth in our businesses, followed by retaining flexibility for acquisitions. After taking these needs into account, our board has authorized the repurchase of up to an additional $12.5 billion of our Class C capital stock.
Presumably that is welcome news to investors. Crawford, you do your own market research. Can you fill in any of the blanks here in terms of the numbers that Google is not giving us?
Yeah, so not yet. What we can see is that some of these bets are extremely long in duration. So, for example, things like Verily, things like Google Fiber, those are probably not meaningful yet, but yet the costs associated with those grew, significantly in terms of, the other bet loss. I mean, $750 million up to $1.32 billion year over year. So they're spending more money on those things, and that's also what you're seeing that's weighing on margins going forward. Now, I guess I will say that these are the one area where they need to start showing more growth and showing more progress is in the Google Cloud Platform. And that's where, they've got two competitors, one being Azure or Microsoft, which is massively pivoted into the segment, and the other being Amazon, obviously. And they are third in a three-horse race right now. And I think that they need to start disclosing the kind of progress they're making with Thomas Kurian now in charge. And I think that's going to be imperative for them to get investor confidence in that segment and that they can participate. They're talking about CapEx growth in that space, but in the next few quarters, they need to start showing how they're growing revenue in that space.
Thomas Kurian, the new head of Google Cloud, who came in replacing Diane Green, but Google Cloud firmly in third place, at least as far as we know, behind Amazon and Microsoft. One interesting question I did ask Ruth Porat was about acquisitions, because this is a company that hasn't made any huge acquisitions in the last 3 years. So I asked if there were any plans to make acquisitions or if they had anything against acquisitions. And she said, we do believe acquisitions are an attractive complement to what we do to drive organic growth. They actually did more smaller acquisitions last year than the year prior, but they have a high bar for those really big acquisitions. We want to make sure if we're doing a deal, it's the right deal. And if it's the right deal, it could be an accelerant for the business. Paul, any ideas, where Google could buy smartly?
I think one of the areas that we see being disrupted is the traditional media business. And so whenever you see a big media property come onto the market, whether it was Time Warner or whether it was DirecTV or whether it was 21st Century Fox, investors always step back and say, is that a business that Google should get into in a bigger way? Yes, they have YouTube, and that is a significant online video business for them. But do they really need to jump into the deep end of the pool as it relates to content and make that another pillar of their growth, much like Jeff Bezos appears to be doing at Amazon? To date, however, Google has really shown no interest in getting into the media space. I think they're concerned about what it will do to their growth rate and what it will do to their returns. So that could be an area, but to date, we have not seen them do anything really.
Right. Ruth Porat, though, saying they're keeping an open mind. Bloomberg's Paul Sweeney, Crawford Del Pret of IDC, thank you both. You can turn to your Bloomberg for more on this. Just get to T Live. Go for more commentary and analysis from our Bloomberg reporters and analysts. And, of course, we will have highlights for you here throughout the show. Well, speaking of acquisitions, JP Morgan says there are a number of companies that would be strong strategic fits for Apple if the company decides to use that major cash pile. The bank says the company should look at acquiring Netflix, video game producer Activision Blizzard, or home speaker maker Sonos. Apple has roughly $130 billion in cash in its coffers. Coming up, messaging startup Slack inches closer to going public, filing key paperwork with regulators to move ahead with its direct listing. We'll bring you all the details ahead. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Messaging platform Slack is moving along with its plans to go public, filing confidential paperwork with regulators. This is just one of several high-profile tech companies on track to hit the public markets in 2019, including Uber, Lyft, and perhaps Airbnb. For more now, we're joined by Bloomberg's Olivia Zaleski, who covers deals for us. And let's be clear, this is not an IPO.
No, it is not. So today, Slack confidentially filed for a proposed public listing, which is sort of filing speak for a direct listing. So direct listing, for those of you who are not familiar with this, is essentially when a company lets its shareholders, its employees, and early investors sell their shares on the public markets, but it doesn't go through the traditional IPO process of using underwriters and big banks to do a whole marketing campaign for them in a roadshow, and essentially allows the early investors to get liquidity in the employees without generating more cash for the company, which creates a lot of dilution.
So this is something that Spotify did as well. It is unusual. Why is Slack going this route?
Well, they're going this route for two reasons, mainly because they already have a lot of cash. They're sitting on a lot of cash right now, and they don't need the marketing or the PR, the publicity, the recognition that comes with the traditional IPO. They really just want to give their early investors and their employees some liquidity.
And also, they can sell the shares right away. There's no
right. There's no lockup, and the biggest reason is it doesn't create dilution. I mean, that's huge for a founder. They don't want to dilute their shares and bring in all this cash that they don't necessarily need.
So, what are the risks? Potential risks?
The jury is still really out on this. Spotify had a very successful listing. I mean, their shares as of today were down 6% from the day that they opened publicly, but that's normal. I think that some people have said there's a risk that the shares could flop on opening day, and you don't have the underwriters to sort of prop up the price of the shares and to guarantee it. But, if the banks do their job, and there are experienced bankers working on this, we understand Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and Allen Co., and they did Spotify's direct listing, they should do a good job leading up to it of really getting the right price for the shares, understanding, on the supply side, what people are willing to sell for, and understanding on the buy side what people are willing to pay.
What about the chance of a government shutdown, another shutdown? I mean, we've been talking a lot on the show about how, the initial shutdown stalled things at the SEC, could have perhaps slowed things down for Uber and Lyft.
Right.
We don't know. So we don't have any concrete details on whether the process actually slowed down, but it certainly has the potential.
I mean, it definitely slowed things down. There's a huge, huge backlog at the SEC right now. I think there's sort of this sense of like a boogeyman waiting in the wings. What's going to happen next week? It could delay things even further. We understand that the SEC is just proceeding, as everything is normal, and there is a backlog, and they're just going to get through things. I mean, Slack has said that it will Actually, they haven't said this. We understand that Slack is planning to, aim to go late spring, middle of the year. So, I mean, it shouldn't delay things too much if there's another, shutdown, unless the shutdown goes on for months and months, in which case everything will be delayed. It's
the uncertainty of going public during the Trump administration. Okay, Olivia Zaleski, our deals reporter, thank you so much for that update. Bloomberg Beta, by the way, the venture capital arm of Bloomberg LP, is an investor in Slack. All right, coming up, electric car startup Lucid wants to take on Tesla, but after 2 years, nothing has hit the market. Is the company on track to begin production next year? And we are live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. Follow our Global Breaking News Network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Tesla has agreed to buy battery tech company Maxwell Technologies for $218 million in stock. The electric car maker is paying a 55% premium to Maxwell's closing price last Friday. The deal will give Tesla more expertise in energy storage and power delivery. Well, leaders across the energy industry are gathering at Bloomberg's Future of Mobility Summit in San Francisco this week to talk about key issues and opportunities in transportation. One company shaping the industry's evolution is Lucid Motors. The electric car startup aims to compete with Tesla with production of its first EV, the Lucid Air, slated for 2020. Joining us now to discuss, Chief Technology Officer Peter Rawlinson. So, when will the car go on sale? Are you still on track?
We're on track, and start of production is slated for the end of next year, 2020.
The car is going to start at $100,000. Is that correct?
Well, we'll have a range of prices. The initial batch of cars that we sell will be highly specified, so therefore they'll average over 100,000. But we'll make progressively more affordable versions of the car available as we ramp up production.
Now, you've said you think you can bring the cost down to about $60,000.
Ultimately, yes.
For the car.
Yes.
The Model 3 is now in the mid-40s. They're aiming to get to $35,000 a car. How do you compete with that?
Because our car is operating in a different sector of the market. It's truly luxurious car. So we're really, you need to compare us with a Mercedes-Benz S-Class, not something like a C-Class Mercedes.
What about the higher-end Teslas?
Well, an S-Class Mercedes is our core competitor, but a Model S Tesla, yes, that would be a comparative electric model. But we differ in that we're truly a luxury brand. If you look at Tesla, they're high-tech, they're beautifully engineered, they're very disruptive, and they're premium price. But you only have to get inside a Tesla to recognize it's not really a luxury car. It's a premium car, but not true luxury.
Have you told that to Elon Musk?
Not yet.
So give us a timeline on production.
Okay, so we start in production in Casa Grande in Arizona, late 2020, and we gradually ramp up production throughout 21 and 22, and we'll ramp up production up from just a few cars to 50,000 units a year within 2 or 3 years.
So when does the first car go on sale and hit the road?
It'll be effectively very early 21. Okay.
So the Saudi private investment fund, which is also an investor in Tesla, is an investor in Lucid.
Absolutely.
Explain that relationship to me, given that Tesla is your competitor.
Well, all I can speak about...
On the premium end, not the luxury end.
Well, yeah, yes, exactly. So we're delighted to have the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia as strategic investors in Lucid Motors. They've invested in the management team, in the vision for the product, and in the technology that we have at Lucid. All our powertrain is designed and created in-house. It's world-class technology, and that's what drew them to us. And they're a great partner because, in return, we can work with them in enabling their vision to transition the economy of Saudi Arabia away from one which is heavily dependent upon fossil fuels. But moreover, together we can create hundreds of high-tech jobs, both in the state of California and in Arizona.
The Saudi Public Investment Fund recently reduced, they didn't decrease their stake in Tesla, but they hedged their risk.
They hedged it.
Is there any indication that they might, bulk up on their investment in Lucid, or any indication of why they did that?
I really can't speak for what moves they've made with Tesla. I can only speak for the relationship with Lucid. And in that, we're very strong strategic partners. There's a spiritual alignment. We both are very committed to really transition towards a more sustainable mobility model. And we believe that the way to do that is first to make the very best car in the world, make it here in the US, create a premium luxury brand, which is Lucid, and make that a global player. And as a consequence, progressively make other models, other cars, which are progressively more affordable, and then more people can benefit, and we can actually have a meaningful impact upon the environment and the impact that can have on global warming.
Now, as you know, there was an explosion of press around the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, tied to Saudi Arabia. Do you have any concerns about the ethics of their money?
Look, the story here, the key story is that we have an alignment, a partnership to do something which is very meaningful and very good for many people, for this generation and for future generations, in moving the world of mobility, the way that mankind is mobilized to a more sustainable model. And I really believe that is our focus, that is my passion, and it's something that we can do in partnership. And the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia is enabling us to exercise that vision.
Now, we've reported that you had talks with Ford about selling a couple of years ago. A deal didn't happen. Ford's CEO confirmed that they did look at Lucid. Would you still be open to a sale?
We believe that with the partnership that we've got and the strength of that partnership and the future we have with a 10-year plan, Lucid can be hugely valuable. We're not contemplating a sale. What we would contemplate is potential partnerships in technology. We think we have world-class technology that all the world could benefit from. And a lot of the incumbent OEs, the traditional automakers, haven't got the technology that we've developed. And I think they could benefit from that. So I think that model would work, but a sale, no.
Okay. Well, we'll be watching for the first Lucid car to hit the road in 2021. Lucid CTO Peter Rawlinson, thank you so much.
Thank you so much
for stopping by.
Thanks.
Coming up, our exclusive reporting on Huawei, including details on how the Chinese company has allegedly been trying to steal U.S. tech secrets. That is next. We're also continuing to monitor Alphabet earnings after the company reported thinner profit margins in the fourth quarter. Speaking on the call moments ago, CEO Sundar Pichai said Google takes security for its users very, very seriously. We'll continue to bring you headlines as we have them. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology Global Link, where we join Bloomberg Daybreak Australia to bring you the latest in global tech news. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco with Sherry An in New York and Heidi Stroud-Watts in Sydney. Let's take a look at the top global tech stories of the day. Heidi?
Emily, we're watching Sony again today. Shares of the company falling the most in about 3.5 years. The Japanese electronics maker reporting weaker profits in the PlayStation business. Sony also reduced its annual revenue forecast. Goldman Sachs and Nomura are among those firms that cut price targets on the company. Well, now that the Trump administration is cracking down, US semiconductor makers are still complaining that China is stealing their secrets. They're still not happy. China is their fastest growing market, and chipmaker lobbyists say that tariffs aren't the answer. They want more federal spending on research and immigration reform that would allow companies to recruit and retain foreign graduates from US universities. Google spending skyrocketed. The parent, Alphabet, reported thinner profit margins in the fourth quarter as the internet giant spent heavily to expand its cloud and hardware businesses. Costs topped $3.1 billion even, and Google's capital expenditures jumped 80%. And those are the top global tech stories of the day. Sherry?
Heidi, thank you. Now, Bloomberg Business Week has a report out now that sheds new light on Huawei, specifically the allegations the Chinese tech giant has been trying to steal U.S. trade secrets. Business Week editor Max Chafkin worked on the story and is here to discuss. And Max, of course, we know that there have been several investigations into Huawei. Most recently, we know that grand jury indictments against the company. But it's what happened last month on the sidelines of the Consumer Electronics Show that's really caught our eye.
Right. And so what we're reporting today is that while those indictments were basically dropping, the indictments last week, the FBI, U.S. Department of Justice, was working on this other case. Now, what we reported today is that Acon Semiconductor, it's a small Chicago-based startup. It's kind of like your typical startup, sort of got into contact with Huawei and found Huawei's actions to be a little bit suspicious, reported that to the FBI, and that led to this crazy scene at the Prime Burger in Las Vegas around CES, where FBI agents had the Acon executives sort of leading the Huawei executives through this, back and forth that they caught on tape. And our reporter Eric Schatzker was, improbably watching the whole thing.
1 minute you are a startup CEO, the next you're wearing a wire for the U.S. government. Max, Eric Schatzker sat down with the CEO of Acon and talked about the sort of opening incident that raised suspicion. I wanted to take a listen to what he had to say.
In sending some of our samples for non-destructive sampling, as we do with the other potential customers, we received back on the second round of sampling our sample, and it had been damaged. And damaged in the sense that a large portion of the glass was missing and broken, which was very concerning, obviously, for us. After seeing this portion of the glass that was missing, we had realized this is not really something that could be done in shipping, but more so it's attempted theft of their intellectual property.
And by the way, Max, this glass is supposedly very innovative, has a layer of artificial diamond coating on it. Give us the play-by-play in terms of what happens next after they get this broken glass back.
So they got the broken glass, and they thought that was weird. Now, I think we should say that, we don't know how good this glass is, but what's sort of interesting to me about this story is sort of what happens next, which is one of the executives from this company, Acon, we just saw the CEO, walked into a field office in Chicago, reported this crime, and then all of a sudden the FBI kind of sprung into action. And as Eric Schatzker writes in the story, there were conference calls. This sample was sent to a lab in Quantico, Virginia. It was analyzed. The analysis suggested that it had been cut with a very, very powerful laser, a weapons-grade laser. And then the company executives got the Huawei reps to tell them that the sample had been to China, which is a violation potentially of U.S. law, and that led to this sting. And like I said, I think what's pretty interesting here is, again, we don't know how big a deal this specific piece of the government's investigation is. What we know is that the government is coming at Huawei, guns blazing. They are expending serious resources on, what amounts to kind of, a small in the scheme of things.
On all of those U.S. allegations, Huawei, though, denying all of those charges on the company itself or on subsidiaries, affiliates. They are saying that they haven't committed violations of U.S. law. They are also not aware of any wrongdoing by Ms. Meng Wanzhou, the CFO. Of course, that was the latest Huawei statement when it came to all of these U.S. indictments. At the same time, though, we know that there is a history of these investigations ongoing on IP theft for the company dating back more than a decade before President Trump's trade war.
Yeah, and we should say also Huawei has not commented on our story. Obviously waiting to see what, if anything, they have to say. It's important to say that there have been this sort of long-running argument kind of between the U.S. and China, where the U.S. accuses Huawei of stealing trade secrets, and Huawei kind of says this is ticky-tacky stuff. So with respect to the Tappy indictment, this is the T-Mobile alleged theft of a part from a robot. As we say in the story, a skeptic could say, hey, look, this is something that happened years ago. It was settled. It was a civil proceeding that was settled. The U.S. is kind of basically picking on Huawei for political purposes. And of course, politics are part of this. President Trump is eager to, strike a better deal with China. And you could could imagine a situation where the Trump administration wants to, put the screws to Huawei to try to, extract concessions out of China.
Max, what are we hearing from the U.S. government? Is there any indication about how this latest sting fits into the broader picture?
Well, it's all speculation for now. The investigation that hasn't led to an indictment. We reported that there was a raid of a Huawei laboratory in San Diego. We'll have to see where it goes, and I think that it's fair to say that the government is not done with Huawei. That said, we don't know, is this going to result in an indictment? Is it going to result in charges? Possibly not. And if it doesn't, that tells you something as well, because it tells you that the FBI, again, going full blast at Huawei and maybe not turning up all that much.
All right. Well, great read in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week. Bloomberg Business Week's Max Chafkin. Thank you, as always, for stopping by. Check out that full report on the Huawei sting in the latest edition of the magazine. Much more ahead. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Since Donald Trump became president of the United States, he has used his Twitter platform to repeatedly attack one business leader in particular, and that is Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. Take the following January tweet, for example. So sorry to hear the news about Jeff Bezos being taken down by a competitor whose reporting, I understand, is far more accurate than the reporting in his lobbyist newspaper, the Amazon Washington Post. Hopefully the paper will soon be placed in better and more responsible hands. Since Trump took office, it appears no one has benefited, however, quite like Bezos. The Amazon chief has become the world's richest person in that time, seeing his net worth skyrocket by more than $66 billion. To tell us more, we've got Bloomberg's deputy White House editor, Mike Dorning, in Washington. So, Mike, that story that President Trump was referring to was a story in the National Enquirer about a personal affair of Jeff Bezos. That aside, it is quite ironic that Bezos, of all the business people in the world, that his wealth has rocketed the most during the Trump presidency.
Yeah, it sort of shows you that the president can huff and puff all he wants, but he's not going to hurt a solidly constructed business that's riding a wave of electronic commerce, digital advertising, and cloud computing. Bezos's business has been robust. All the things Trump has threatened, antitrust suits, raising postal rates, other attacks on Amazon, hasn't really materialized. And so Bezos has become the world's richest person while Trump is in the White House. And in fact, he's made $66 billion since Donald Trump's election. So he's made more off the Trump era than anyone else, even the president.
Now, Bezos hasn't just hung back. I mean, he's responded to the president at times during the campaign when candidate Trump referred to Amazon as a no-profit company. Bezos wrote, "Finally trashed by real Donald Trump. Will still reserve him a seat on the Blue Origin rocket. Hashtag send Donald to space."
Yes.
Is this wise, given the possibility of regulation and that Amazon could be in regulatory crosshairs?
Well, I don't think that the tweets really make that big a difference. Bezos' ownership of the Washington Post is one of the things that's bugged Trump, and the Washington Post has published a bunch of investigative journalism that has shown problems in the administration and also made revelations about the Russia investigation. That is what appears to be aggravating the president. So that's where the risk comes from, and he's just embraced having the Washington Post and doing that journalism. And as it's turned out, Trump has not really been able to do much that's hurt Bezos. If anything, Bezos is benefiting. It looks like they're doing very well in the competition to get a big cloud contract from the Pentagon. The Pentagon, and this is Donald Trump's Pentagon, decided it makes more sense to have cloud computing from a single source, and that gave Amazon a huge advantage over, say, Oracle and other competitors.
Now, speaking of the Washington Post, they ran a much talked about Super Bowl ad narrated by Tom Hanks celebrating American journalism. Knowing keeps us free. Democracy dies in darkness, which, given the stories you've mentioned coming from the Washington Post, certainly seems to take a shot at the administration. Trump Jr. tweeted, "You know how mainstream journalists could avoid having to spend millions on a Super Bowl commercial to gain some undeserved credibility? How about report the news and not their leftist BS for a change?" What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, this kind of actually probably helps both the Trump brand and the Washington Post brand, ironically. I mean, it shows the Washington Post to be willing to hold power to account, and it also, for the Trump supporters, shows or presents them as under attack from other institutions. So there's a weird synergy here between the Bezos-Washington Post and the Trump political machine. By having this fight, they both benefit tremendously.
Well, and Bezos perhaps hasn't been totally unscathed during the Trump presidency, of course, given that National Enquirer report. But if you look at the size of his wealth, even if he has to split his assets with his ex-wife in the divorce, he would still, rank pretty highly on the wealth charts, right?
In fact, if he had to split his assets with his wife, he'd be about back where he was the day Trump got elected. Arguably, you could say the Trump presidency paid for the divorce, if there's a divorce.
Which also puts into context just how much he has made in the last 2 years. His wealth valued at $134 billion. Mike Dorning for Bloomberg. Thank you. Now, speaking of people opposed to Amazon, New York State has appointed a critic of the Amazon headquarters deal to the Public Authorities Control Board. New York State Senator Michael Gianaris will be one of 3 voting members on the board that has the right to block projects that come before it. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo must now decide whether or not to accept the selection of Gianaris. Gianaris told Bloomberg Technology that, quote, "My views on the Amazon deal are clear and unambiguous and not changing. Amazon has yet to respond to our request for comment." Still ahead, a brutal cold snap gripped the country last week, bringing dangerous sub-zero temperatures to the Midwest. The EPA tells us what this means for climate change next. This is Bloomberg. And we will talk about the biggest takeaways from Google's fourth quarter earnings report. Here's CEO Sundar Pichai moments ago on the call talking about expanding into a new business.
On Project Stream, being able to, deliver gaming with the kind of, real-time requirements, the low latency requirements, it's definitely, for us, it's an important computing advance. We think it'll help us drive, the newer computing platforms we are working on. You will see us do more there in 2019.
The Midwest faced a brutal Arctic blast last week, and President Trump jumped at the chance to take a jab at global warming. He tweeted, quote, "In the beautiful Midwest, wind chill temperatures are reaching minus 60 degrees, the coldest ever recorded. In coming days, expected to get even colder. People can't last outside even for minutes. What the is going on with global warming? Please come back fast. We need you." I sat down with EPA acting administrator Andrew Wheeler, who's up for nomination to formally lead the agency, and asked if he agrees with the president.
Global warming is certainly occurring, and man certainly has an impact on global warming. I think there's still some issues as far as the extent and how much for any individual weather event. But the important thing, what we're doing is following the law, and we're following the law that Congress passed. The Clean Air Act tells us what we can and cannot do, the Supreme Court decisions, and under my leadership, we are following what the statutes that Congress has passed, as well as the direction that we've received from the courts.
But does the cold give you pause about the validity of global warming?
Well, I don't think you can look at any one weather event and determine whether or not the planet is warming or cooling. I think you have to look at the models overall over a number of years, and you can't just focus on one particular weather event.
So the president's conclusion might be flawed.
Oh, I didn't say that. I think there's a lot more variability in the climate models and the climate data than most people realize. And I think the president's reflecting on that.
Now, you did, at your confirmation hearing, you said you were an 8 or a 9 on a 10-point scale of concern about climate change, though some would look at the actions that the EPA has taken thus far as retreating from aggressively regulating carbon dioxide emissions. How do you square that? Are you retreating from the fight?
No, we're not retreating at all. You know, the Obama administration put forward their plan for the electric power sector, the Clean Power Plan. That was stayed by the Supreme Court, so it never actually took effect. What we're doing is proposing a regulation, the Affordable Clean Energy Rule for the power sector, that follows the law, so it will be upheld by the courts, and it will lead to 34% reduction in CO2 over the lifetime of that regulation. So we're moving forward. We're making cuts in CO2. CO2 has gone down since 2005. That was the high water mark for the United States. But it's a global issue. It's a global problem, and the president recognizes that, which is why he pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. The Paris Climate Accord was not a global solution. We do need a global solution if we're going to address that issue, and we don't want to unilaterally disarm our economy when other economies around the world are not doing what they should be doing for climate.
One of your colleagues, Bill Weirham, said he's getting regular climate science updates from staff, from scientists. What are you doing to educate yourself?
I am as well. I've had several briefings from the career scientists at the agency. We had several more planned for January. We're going to get those rescheduled now for February because of the agency was shut down in January. But no, I'm getting regular briefings from my staff, from my career staff at the agency.
So if not Paris, what's better?
Well, something that will bring China and other emerging markets, to the table for real reductions.
My interview there with EPA Acting Administrator Andrew Wheeler. You can catch the full conversation online. Meantime, recapping today's top story, and that is Alphabet's fourth quarter results. The investor call is now over. Shares still down after hours after Alphabet revealed that profit margins were below expectations as the company spent heavily on the cloud and YouTube. Here with us to discuss our Bloomberg Tech's Mark Bergen, who's been listening in on the call throughout the hour. Ruth Porat ended the call saying they're, quote, very mindful of the pace of cost growth, but a lot of questions about disclosures from analysts and why we're not getting more detail on some of these new businesses.
And she said that a lot of those costs are going to continue. A lot of it went to headcount. There are almost 100,000 full-time employees, which is a massive amount. Porat said on the call that a lot of those are going to the cloud business, which is where we saw no new disclosures, but certainly some signs of kind of optimistic talk from both Ruth Porat and Sundar Pichai.
Are analysts getting frustrated?
It came up a couple times in the call. There were certainly in the analyst reports before the earnings, they said, oh, maybe we'll see some breakouts of YouTube. They bring it out to 2015. Amazon broke out AWS. It's called like a second IPO. The analysts have been eager for this, for some new disclosures around YouTube sales, for some disclosures around the cloud business. They shared very vague terms with the cloud business about some numbers of customers they won over, I think, 1 million, but nothing coming close to the disclosures that the analysts want.
So, why do you think investors give Amazon a pass when it comes to profit margins, but not Alphabet? Is it because we still don't have a lot of information about the other businesses, and it really is an advertising business still, as far as we know?
Yeah, I think, in part it's because their core business has great, wonderful margins, right? That search ads, and they beat on all the metrics today on EPS, on revenue. You look at their Google properties, their paid clicks. Like if you just assess the health of the advertising business, it looks pretty solid, even though we don't have any visibility into YouTube. But what they're pushing into, and with cloud, with hardware, as we mentioned, Sundar even talked about moving more into e-gaming. These are businesses where Amazon, in particular, and Apple are well ahead. And with cloud, they've almost had a 3-year runway and haven't shown any progress necessarily that they're catching up to Amazon and Microsoft in that market. And the same could be said for hardware.
Let's talk about e-gaming, this new topic on the call. This is a business of interest.
Yeah,
what did they say?
That was the first time. The question was about Project Stream, which is this relatively new program for Google. Google has been trying this in different ways. Right? They have a lot of the infrastructure in place. They clearly have the back end to be able to pull off streaming at massive scale. If you just look at YouTube, some of the most popular YouTube videos are about e-gaming and sports. But this is the market where Amazon and Twitch is sort of running away. So this is an opportunity like the cloud business where Google was out and ahead, and yet it could be a possibility where they're out in the head on the tech, and yet they lose the market.
So, when it comes to costs this year, what are you going to be watching for?
We're going to keep watching for TAC, which is the traffic acquisition cost. So
which did go up.
They go up, and Porat, the CFO, talked about this. It's eventually going to come down. And that's the amount they pay out to companies like Apple and carriers. We're going to keep looking at capital expenditure, which just grew about 80%, and that's all going to Google. So that's not spending on things like driverless cars and some of their healthcare programs. I mean, I think they are demonstrating that a concern, if you go back 3 years from Wall Street, was Google spending way too much on moonshots. That's not the case anymore. Google's spending way too much on the cloud business. So these are efforts that I think investors are still, in the long run, believe they can probably pull off and turn into profitable businesses.
All right, Mark Bergen covering Alphabet for us. Thank you so much for keeping us updated. All right. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On tomorrow's show, we will be talking with Roger McNamee, author of a new book out about Facebook and CEO Mark Zuckerberg called Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe. Tune in. Of course, we are live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.